When grief arrives, allow her a place to sit. Let her remove her shoes at the door and offer her water for her stay. Welcome her with arms open, even if she overstays. And only when she's familiar with the cracked wallpaper in your kitchen, where you have spent your days making tea in the morning, only then will she leave and say, "Here, we grieve, but we do not drown." What if we saw our grief differently? What if we saw it as something that is here to heal and not harm? What if grief was the woman who came to visit when you least expected, and instead of closing the door, you let her in? Because maybe she's here to teach you something about love. Sometimes I imagine grief as a woman who comes to visit. She never knocks politely, she just lets herself in. Sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes in the middle of a laugh. She would sit herself down at my table uninvited, and she wouldn't always leave when I want her to. For a long time, I tried to ignore her. I would close the door, avoid making eye contact. But the more that I resisted her, the heavier she became. So eventually I asked myself, what if she isn't here to harm me? What if she came with something to teach me? You see, we live in a world that has been taught to treat grief as a problem, as a stage to pass through, a checklist, something to get over quickly, quietly, and privately. So we turn it into an event. We are told that grief should be linear, 5 distinct stages neatly packaged. But grief is not linear. It is layered. It is shape-shifting and embodied. It moves through our bodies in the way our breath catches us in our chest, in the way our heaviness is carried in our shoulders, in the way we hold our silence in a crowded room. You see, grief cannot be a private exile. Researchers in the Journal of Death and Dying describe grief more as oscillation, a swinging between remembering and rebuilding, between loss and restoration. And because loss is the one thing we all have in common, it cannot be the exception to being human. It is the rule. So, how do we go back to normal when the landscape itself has changed? The truth is we don't. We have to learn to walk inside this new landscape. And I know a thing or two about that, because the landscape of my life completely shifted when I lost my sister. You see, her loss came at a time where milestones should have been marked by her presence. Graduations, beginnings, celebrations. But these moments were now marked not by joy, but by her absence. You know, sometimes I would be in a room full of people laughing and celebrating, but I couldn't quite find the language for where I was. Life started to feel like an unfinished sentence without her. I didn't know how to create a life worth living without her there, because the one person I really wanted to share it with was no longer there. And I know that this is the truth for many of us here. Mourning is rushed, silence becomes default, and we don't know how to talk about it, so we don't. But silence made me feel more disorientated and fractured. I felt like I needed to find a language to speak about how I feel, to speak about the grief. So as a poet, I asked myself, what if grief had its own language? What if I gave her a name, a voice, and most importantly, a purpose? So I began to write. I wrote my grief into poems. I gave her words, and I let her, grief, speak. When I gave her words, she no longer was a shadow. She became a mirror, reflecting back the love that made loss feel so deep. When I gave her language, she became a companion, one that could teach me something about love. So I wrote about my conversations with her. One of them went like this. Yesterday, You were alive in grief's mouth. Your laughter was heard echoing in her throat. The tears I held behind my eyelids disappeared. We spoke you to life yesterday. I now know what it means to love someone to life, that acceptance will feel like knowing you are here, even when you are not. You see, poetry gave me a way forward, because poetry, just like grief, is not polished or linear. It's fragmented, it's jagged, and it's rhythmic. And poetry matters here because it's one of the oldest technologies that humans have to hold emotion and memory. Long before psychology, we had stories, laments, and chants to honor the dead and to hold the living. Even neuroscience will tell us that when we read poetry, both our language and emotion centers light up. So feeling and thought are weaved together. And this is why poetry gives grief a language when ordinary words might fail. So, here's what I've come to learn. Grief is kaleidoscopic. You hold it to the light and it refracts both sorrow and joy, silence and song, joy and memory. It is not one thing, it is many. And grief comes in those little fragments. Sometimes it's their favorite song playing on the radio. It's the smell of their perfume that catches you off guard. A photograph of your favorite memory with them. Some will cut, some heals, and some bring laughter through tears. But together they form a mosaic. And at the center of that mosaic is love. Because we can only grieve what we have loved. So when we give poetry a voice, it no longer becomes a private exile. It becomes witnessed. So the question is, how do we rewrite our grief? Well, let me offer you 3 practices that can help you begin to language grief. Number 1, name it. The next time grief visits you, don't push her away. Say her name out loud. Say what she feels like. Maybe she's a shadow, or maybe she's a storm. Maybe she is the woman at your door. When we name grief, we acknowledge her presence and we make her less abstract. For me, when grief comes to visit, I take it as a full opportunity to remember my sister, to name her, to bring her back into existence right now. I take it as an opportunity to revisit the depth of my love for her. Number 2, image it. This one might sound crazy, but if you close your eyes and you think about it, give grief an image. You don't have to be a poet. It can be a line. Grief feels like a cracked teacup. Grief feels like a stone in my pocket weighing me down. When we give grief an image, it becomes tangible. And when it's tangible, we can hold it. And only when we can hold it, can we let it go. Number 3, share it. Share that line or that image with someone. You'll be surprised who will say, I know what that feels like. When we share grief, it becomes a community. And grief thrives in silence. So when we share it, it becomes less lonely. We shouldn't shy away from talking about our grief. Because when we do that, it allows grief to breathe through the wound. And notice, this isn't just about poetry on paper. This is about changing how we speak about grief, how we language it in everyday life. So instead of saying, I'm fine, how about you say, grief feels a little heavy today. That small shift changes the narrative. Because when we do this, when we name grief, when we give her an image, and when we share it, the community is created. And suddenly, grief is no longer an intruder. She becomes a companion, a doorway back to love. And again, we cannot grieve if we have not loved. And if love is known as one of the greatest forces on this earth, how much more important is it to sit with your grief? So, I challenge you, the next time grief comes to visit, or if she just barges in without any notice. Just let her. Let her make herself comfortable. Let her take off her shoes, make her the best cup of tea you've ever made, and sit with her, even if she overstays. Because hidden underneath all of her ache is evidence of the love that you carry. And love is worth rewriting. So next time, remember that grief is not the opposite of love. Grief is love, just wearing another face. Thank you.